Welcome, everyone. My name's Scott Arietta. I'm the CEO of Unity & Company, and we're the strategic partners that market-leading brands rely on to unify their leadership teams and catalyze cultural transformation. Now, every month, we host events like these for executives across a variety of industries, and the goal here is really to connect senior leaders in the industry so that they can share their insights and spark conversations that lead to an exchange of ideas that you can bring back to your organizations. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn or to sign up for our mailing list at unityandcompany.com if you'd like invitations to future events. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the session. Okay, so today's session is called New Role, New Team, How Leaders Can Accelerate Success in Their First 90 Days. And it's a conversation designed specifically for leaders who are stepping into a new role, inheriting a new team, or leading through a moment of transition and want to do it intentionally. So this moment, your first 90 days, is one of the most critical windows in a leader's journey. In fact, research from Gartner shows that nearly 50% of new executives fail to meet their organization's expectations in the first 18 months. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not smart or that they don't have the experience. It means that they haven't been set up to succeed or didn't approach the transition the right way. And this is what today is all about. It's helping you to think more strategically, more relationally, and more holistically about this powerful inflection point in your leadership. So we're going to blend some insights from some of the most respected thought leaders in the field, including Michael Watkins, who wrote The First 90 Days and built the foundational roadmap for leadership transitions, Amy Edmondson, a Harvard Business School professor whose work on psychological safety will help you to build trust early with your new team, and Edgar Schein, whose decades of research on organizational culture will help you to understand the invisible forces that make or break transitions. And we'd also like to explore how tools like management drives can accelerate your assimilation and connection with your new team. Now, this isn't going to be a lecture, it's a working session. And I want you to reflect, apply, and walk away with tangible actions that you can take in your next transition, or even in the one that you're in right now. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and dive right in. So let's start here. Why does this moment matter so much? Why is it that these first 90 days hold so much weight? Now let's ground this with some hard truth. According to Gartner, up to 60% of new managers fail within their first 24 months of taking on a new role. And as I mentioned earlier, nearly half of executives hired from outside the company will fail within 18 months. Now, why is this? It's because they underestimate the complexity of the transition. They focus on what to do before thinking about how they need to be. And the research here is clear. Success in a new role isn't just about your credentials or how smart you are. It's about how well you integrate into a new system, how you build relationships, and how you adapt your leadership to match the moment. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting, because the biggest challenges that new leaders face are often invisible. You might be focused on hitting goals, making a splash, or proving yourself, but your team is watching something different. What they're asking is, do I trust this person? Do they get how things work here? Can they actually lead us? And in those early days, you're not just being evaluated on your results, you're being studied as a signal. Now, that idea comes from Dr. Edgar Schein, who is a former MIT professor and one of the founding thinkers in organizational culture. Now, Schein argued that when a new leader enters a team, they're not just stepping into a new job, they're stepping into a cultural system. And here's the key. That cultural system is always trying to maintain equilibrium. So when you show up, the system reacts. Now, sometimes it's subtle. It's sideways glances, closed off body language, and sometimes it's more overt, resistance, avoidance, testing your authority. And that's not because people are bad or trying to sabotage you. It's because any system under change will instinctively push back to protect itself. Schein calls this cultural embedding. You can't walk into a new system and change it immediately. You have to earn the right to lead. And that starts with understanding how that system works, what it values, how decisions are made, and how trust is built. And that's not easy, especially if you're coming from a different organization or if you're trying to lead a team through a tough moment like a restructuring or a merger. And that's why tools like management drives can be so helpful. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation, because they allow you to quickly uncover what motivates your team, where friction might live, and how your own leadership style might land with others. And instead of guessing or relying solely on one-on-ones or your own instincts, you get a shared language for understanding how your team thinks and what they need from you in order to feel safe, seen, and supported. We'll talk more about that soon, but for now, the key takeaway is this: your first 90 days aren't just about proving your value, they're about earning trust, reading the system, and laying the groundwork for sustainable leadership. And it starts with choosing to approach this moment with intention. So, next, we'll look at the three dimensions of accelerated leadership and why success in a new role requires more than a strong plan. It requires a total shift in mindset. Okay, let's start out by busting one of the biggest myths that's out there, that starting a new role is just about having a great plan. I can't tell you how many times I've seen high performing leaders walk into a new team with a color coded 90-day strategy and they still fall flat. Now, why is this? It's because they mistook their strategy for readiness. They jumped into execution mode without doing the relational or cultural groundwork, and that's like trying to build a house on sand. This is what I call the 90-day myth, the belief that if you just show up with a playbook, people will automatically follow. But here's the truth: people don't follow plans, they follow people. And in those first 90 days, the team isn't just evaluating your ideas, they're evaluating you. Do you listen? Do you get them? Do you move too fast or too slow? And if they feel like you're bulldozing, like you're disconnected or overconfident, they won't push back directly. They'll just disengage. And the danger is not in failing fast, it's in failing quietly. When people stop talking, you've already lost. So instead of rushing in with a fixed plan, great leaders begin their transitions with what we call a sense making phase. That term, sense making, that comes from the work of Carl Weick, an organizational psychologist who defined it as the process through which people give meaning to an experience. So in leadership transitions, sense making is the act of learning the terrain before you chart the course. So what does that look like practically? Listening tours, asking open-ended questions, studying decision-making norms, getting the real story behind past initiatives, what worked and what hurt. You can't design your 90-day plan until you understand what kind of system you're stepping into. And that takes humility, it takes curiosity, and it takes patience. And frankly, that takes confidence because insecure leaders are the ones who rush to prove themselves. So, the reframe I want to offer here is your first 90 days aren't about proving your capability, they're about building your credibility. And credibility is earned, not declared. Okay, so now that we've taken the pressure off having the perfect plan, let's talk about what really matters. Now, through our work with leaders and through the research, we've found that leaders who succeed in new roles focus on three core dimensions. Strategic clarity. This is where people most naturally want to go. So this answers questions like what's the mission? What are the KPIs? What's the business doing? Where's the business going? You need to understand priorities, stakeholders, challenges, and where you can add the most value. But clarity alone isn't enough. Next is relational trust. This is the piece that's most often underestimated. Building trust early is one of the biggest accelerators to success. This is where Amy Edmondson's work becomes crucial. So she's a professor at Harvard Business School who coined the term psychological safety, and that's the belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Edmondson's research shows that teams with high psychological safety are more innovative, more resilient, and more likely to surface real issues. Now, in a new role, your team won't take risks with you or even tell you the truth until they feel safe. So, trust isn't a byproduct, it's a priority. The last is cultural alignment. This is the invisible layer. What's the vibe of the team? What do they really value? How are decisions made here, not on paper, but actually in practice? And this is where Edgar Schein's concept of decoding culture comes in. Culture isn't just values on a wall, it's what gets rewarded, punished, and repeated. And if your leadership style clashes with the team's unspoken rules, you'll feel that friction fast. Now, this is where management drives can help you to get ahead of those landmines. So the question I want to ask you here as we move forward is, are you thinking across all three dimensions, strategy, trust, and culture? Or are you over relying on just one? Because when these three are aligned, that's when you lead with velocity and not just motion. Next, we'll look and explore what this looks like in action across the 30, 60, and 90-day arc. So let's talk about a new way to approach your first 90 days. One that integrates strategy, psychology, and culture so you don't just survive the transition, you can lead through it with confidence. Now, rather than following a one size fits all template, I recommend breaking your first 90 days into three distinct but potentially overlapping phases. So in days 0 to 30, listen and learn deeply. Days 31 to 60, align and anchor. And days 61 through 90, act and amplify. These phases aren't rigid boxes. You'll likely be doing some listening while you're also aligning, or acting while you're still uncovering insights. But framing your first 90 days in this way helps you to balance patience with progress. Now, we're going to walk through each of these phases. And as we do, I'll show you how to embed psychological safety, cultural insight, and strategic clarity into the DNA of your onboarding. So let's start with the first phase, days 0 to 30, which is listening and learning deeply. Okay, so your first month in a new role is all about deep learning, but not just about the business. It's about the people, the culture, and the undercurrents. Now, too often, leaders feel pressure to make an immediate impact. And while urgency is real, the most effective early move is to pause and to listen. Now, here's what that might look like. Do a listening tour. Schedule one on ones, not just with your direct reports, but with peers, support staff, and even skeptics. Your goal isn't to impress, it's to understand. You can ask insightful questions. What do you love about working here? What do you wish leaders understood better? And what would you keep and what would you change? And then observing carefully. How are meetings run? Who speaks up and who stays quiet? How are decisions made and how are mistakes handled? You can capture key themes. What patterns do you see in communication, motivation, and team dynamics? This is also the ideal time to introduce management drives. Running management drives assessments during this phase will allow you to quickly decode individual and team motivations, identify potential points of friction, and start conversations that build trust right away. So instead of trying to read the room by feel, you get a clear visual of how your team operates and how you can lead them most effectively. Now, remember, in these first 30 days, the goal isn't to control, it's to connect. It's not to act, but to absorb. Because the leader who listens well early is the leader who leads well later. Next, we'll move into phase two, which is aligning and anchoring your early direction in a way that brings your team with you. Now, once you've listened deeply, the next step is to start aligning your early direction and anchoring your leadership in a way that your team can trust. Now, this is a subtle but powerful phase. You're not just rolling out a grand vision, not just yet. You're co creating clarity. And here's what that can look like: synthesizing what you've heard. So share back the themes that you've noticed during your listening tour. This helps your team to feel seen and shows that you're paying attention. You can start shaping norms, begin conversations about how you'll work together. Things like, what does good communication look like? How do we give feedback? What behaviors will we reward or challenge? You can host a team assimilation session. Now, this is where management drives becomes a game changer because you can share your own management drives profile and leadership preferences, and you can invite your team to do the same. You can discuss where your styles align and where you'll need to flex. And these conversations surface things that would otherwise go unspoken. You create a shared map of how the team ticks and what they need from each other and from you. And this is also the phase where you can start identifying priorities together. What quick wins would build momentum? What do we need to stop doing? Where are we already strong? And how can we double down on that? This doesn't just create buy-in, it builds belief. Your team starts to see you not as a threat or an outsider, but as someone who respects what's working and is here to help amplify it. Now, by the time you reach days 61 to 90, it's time to start moving forward from listening and alignment into thoughtful action. But again, this isn't about launching a massive transformation. It's about delivering symbolic wins, the kind of early actions that show that you're serious, but also strategic. So here's what to focus on. You got to pick the right wins. Choose one or two priorities that address real pain points that the team has suffered, are visible to others, and are achievable within the first 90 days. Make the win a signal. What message do you want this early action to send? That you listen, that you move decisively, that you care about well being and not just output? Next, you can institutionalize culture. So you can start solidifying your leadership rituals, how you open meetings, how you recognize wins, how you coach, check in, or give feedback. Now, these rituals become the new normal, and people begin to trust not just what you say, but how you show up. Management drives can continue to be a compass here. How are people motivated to act? Who needs support versus autonomy? Are you rewarding behaviors that align with the drives of your team? By the end of this phase, you're no longer the new leader, you're the leader. You've built enough relational capital, cultural fluency, and strategic traction to lead with confidence and to invite your team to do the same. So, next, we'll talk about the common traps leaders fall into during this process and how to avoid them with grace and awareness. Now, before we move into some of the tools that can support this work, let's pause and look at what derails even the most experienced leaders. Because if we don't name the traps, we're likely to walk straight into them. So here are four of the most common that I've seen. The first is trying to prove yourself too quickly. This is especially common for leaders who are promoted into a stretch role or hired in to fix something. The pressure to validate your presence often leads to rushed decisions, overpromising, and a lack of listening. The next thing is applying old playbooks to new contexts. What worked in your last team, your last company, or your last culture may not translate here. Leaders often rely on past success instead of understanding what the new team or system actually needs. Next up is avoiding conflict to be liked. Early on, it's tempting to play nice and to avoid rocking the boat. But if you sidestep through tough conversations, misalignment grows under the surface and it becomes harder to address later. And finally, ignoring culture because it feels intangible. Look, you can't lead what you can't see. If you don't make the invisible forces of culture visible, you're flying blind. And this is where most 90-day plans fall apart. They ignore the human layer. So the big reframe here is you're not just managing a transition, you are being shaped by it. Your success won't come from checking boxes. It will come from building relationships, earning trust, and making culture part of your plan, not an afterthought. Which brings us to a tool that helps to make all of this more concrete. So let's talk more about management drives. All right, so I've been talking about it a lot, but what is management drives? Now, at its core, it's an assessment tool that helps leaders and teams understand what motivates them. But unlike personality tools that focus on traits or behaviors, management drives looks at what fundamentally drives your choices, your energy, and your leadership style. So it uses six core colors to represent different motivational patterns. Green represents harmony, relationships, and belonging. Blue is about structure, process, and clarity. Orange is about results, achievement, and competition. Red, power, action, and decisiveness. Yellow is visions, ideas, and big picture thinking. And finally, purple is about loyalty, tradition, and security. Now, everyone has a unique profile and a combination of colors in different magnitudes that shows what energizes them and what drains them. So why does this matter in your first 90 days? Because it gives you a language and a lens to understand your own style. How do you lead when you're under stress? What do you prioritize naturally? What are some things that you might overlook? It helps you to decode your team's needs. What do your direct reports need in order to feel motivated? What are the potential friction points? And where might your style land wrong? It helps you to start deeper conversations. So instead of surfacing surface level team bonding, you can have real grounded dialogue about how to work better together. So here's an example. Let's say that you're a strong orange leader, meaning you're really results driven and action oriented. But let's say that your team leans heavily green. So they value collaboration, inclusiveness, and time to process. So if you charge in with a high speed goal, crushing energy, you might unintentionally trigger resistance, not because people disagree with the goal, but because the pace and the tone don't feel safe or inclusive. Now, with management drives, you can name that dynamic early. You can talk about it openly and adjust it together. So instead of leading by trial and error, you lead with insight. And that can save months of tension and earn you trust that would normally take years to build. So, in a moment, I'll walk you through a case study of what this looks like in practice. But for now, remember this: your team is already trying to figure you out. Management drives helps you to figure them out too. And that creates a powerful foundation for everything else to come. So let's bring this to life with a quick story. So a few months ago, we worked with a new VP who had just stepped into a leadership role at a fast-growing tech company. And it was a classic challenge. The team was under pressure, morale was low, and the last leader had exited abruptly. And so instead of rushing in with a turnaround plan, this new VP took a different approach. She started with curiosity. She launched a listening tour. She met with every team member individually, asked open-ended questions, and took really careful notes. But she didn't stop there. She also brought in management drives. And each team member completed the management drives assessment, and the results were really eye opening. Several key players were deeply green, so very relationship driven, motivated by harmony. But the VP herself was a high red and orange. So she was fast moving, goal oriented, and action biased. And this explains some of the tension that she felt early on. I mean, in her words, she said, I thought that they were resistant, but really they were relational. They needed to feel seen before they could buy in. So she shifted her approach. She slowed down to build trust. She gave more space for collaboration. She acknowledged the emotional fatigue that the team was carrying. And within the first 30 days, something shifted. The team started to lean in. They reopened conversations that had been stuck. One of them was really skeptical and said, this is the first time that I've felt hopeful in months. By 60 days, they were aligned around a new set of priorities and executing together. So, what changed? Not just the strategy, the energy, the trust, the dynamics. And it all started with understanding what was driving the team underneath the surface. Now, that's the power of management drives. It moves you from guessing to knowing, from tension to trust, and from hesitancy to cohesion. Okay, so let's bring this all together. Here's your invitation. Start building your own 90-day planning canvas. Not a rigid checklist, but a living, breathing framework that helps you to lead with intention across the three dimensions that we talked about: strategy, psychology, and culture. And here are a few prompts to help you get started. So in day 0 to 30, the listening and learning phase, what's your stakeholder map? What themes are emerging from your conversations? Where can management drives give you deeper insights into team dynamics? For days 31 to 60, the aligning and anchoring phase, what behaviors and rituals will you model? What expectations do you need to co create? And where can you leverage management drives to surface strengths and stretch areas? In days 61 to 90, which is act and amplify phase, what symbolic win can you deliver? What cultural signals will that win reinforce? And how will you celebrate progress and reinforce norms? You don't have to have all the answers today, but if you leave with one insight, let it be this one. Leadership transitions are less about proving yourself and more about earning the right to lead. And when you approach your first 90 days with this intention, with reflection and tools like management drives, you don't just take on a new role, you elevate it. So, in our final moments, I'll offer you a next step for those of you who want to go deeper and explore what this might look like in your own transition. Now, as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a simple question. What would it look like to lead your next transition with intention instead of instinct? Because here's the truth, you don't need to navigate these 90 days alone. If you're stepping into a new role or supporting someone who is, we would love to help. So at Unity and Company, we offer complimentary management drives assessments for select leaders, along with a 45-minute private debrief to help you understand your own motivational profile and guidance on how to use that insight to better connect with your team. Now, this isn't a sales pitch, it's an invitation to reflect, to reset, and to start strong. So if you're interested, just reach out to us using the contact information on this slide after this session, and we'd be honored to help support you in your leadership journey. A couple of other things that we'd like to offer you as we close. Now, if you are the only person to attend this presentation from your organization and you wish that you weren't, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to do an encore presentation for others in your organization. And if something that we talked about today sparked your interest and you're interested in understanding how we could potentially partner together in the future, we'd also love to spend some time connecting with you so that you can understand, or so that we can understand your needs and share more about our capabilities. Thank you again for your time and your curiosity and your commitment to growing as a leader. So let's finish with a quote that captures the heart of this work. When you enter a new system, you become a part of that system. Change it too fast and you're the intruder, but learn it deeply and you earn the right to lead it. Transitions aren't just about speed. They're about timing, empathy, and earning the right to lead. Thank you again, and I hope that the next 90 days become your strongest yet.